Now this is very exciting, folks, and it's exciting on many levels. Number one, it's taking place in California. Number two, it's right in Nancy Pelosi's backyard. So I have to thank those folks up there, again, for having the courage to go forward on this and complete that mission out there at Pete's Coffee Shop. You also notice that during that, there was some negativity surrounding it. Certainly if you see someone who has an exposed weapon, you're probably going to think they're law enforcement or something similar to that. When you see a crowd of people with exposed weapons, certainly there's no reason for you to be concerned with that. So what I like about the issue is that, number one, it's not a new issue. It's only new in California. And in future shows, I am going to bring to you opencarry.org. And they are the original people involved here. And as a continuing part of this series, our guest editor is going to come on here in just a minute. And there he is right there. David, how are you this morning?
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Now, David, you know, this open carry issue, I know it's not new, but I think it's new to a lot of people in California.
Yes, and I agree with you that the courage that we're seeing out of these folks in California is, and you'll have to excuse me, I'm getting some feedback here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you good now.
Okay, good. The courage that these people are showing is really something else, and they're doing us all a great service through normalizing the practice of concealed carry, because as we can see in the video clip, that one woman, she was just frightened to death about seeing people who are carrying firearms who are not uniformed law enforcement agents. And it seemed almost like her solution to this was to want to bury her head in the sand and say, you know, I don't want to see this because it makes me feel bad, it makes me feel unsafe, as opposed to whether or not it actually makes her safer or not. So I salute these people for going about the business of normalizing and showing that, in fact, these are normal people. These are not what the media tries to stereotype gun owners as being. So I think that that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. And folks, if you didn't tune in the last couple of weeks, David has come on several times. He is the creator of probably the most prolific internet contact on gun rights, and you should be a part of this. And it is gunrightsexaminer.com, and he is also the author of War on Guns. It's one of those blogs that you should pay attention to. And that is some of the background that David brings to the show. And we asked him to come on and elaborate a little bit about this open carry. And so this is not a new issue then. This has been around the country. I know that I've spoken to some folks at opencarry.org. And we're going to have them in future shows. I think that you know, and is John, help me with his last.
Yes, John Pierce.
Yeah, right. And John's going to come on in a future show, and he's going to explain how this came together. He, as well as his partner, I think, are attorneys, and this law has been on the books. California is the only place that actually has begun this. Everywhere else, well, not say everywhere else, I think in some 38, maybe to 40 states, you can actually carry an exposed weapon loaded. The difference is in California, it cannot be loaded, correct?
And in fact, California, you used to be able to, up until the late 60s, when the legislature got scared to death of people carrying firearms openly, and so they passed what was known as the Mulford Act, and that relegated people who are carrying, and it's not universal. I think there's some exceptions, like you can still carry at campsites in California. I believe that there are unincorporated areas with population thresholds. I'm really not up on that part of it. But essentially, for the most part, if you want to carry openly in California, it, number one, has to be a zone that's not a no-gun zone, like a school or something like that. And if that's the case where you can, the weapon must be unloaded. And so one of the things I notice about the people who criticize the open carriers is what they really want is they want no armed citizens, because the open carriers are trying to comply with the law. The only choice left to them, if they want to have the means of defense available at hand on their persons, is to carry with the firearm unloaded. Now, this creates a situation where the law is actually mandating that a citizen become more vulnerable to an attack, because, as you know, in many defensive firearms classes, they will teach you that an attacker can cover a distance of about 21 feet and strike a target in approximately a second and a half. Well, if you have to reach for your firearm, if you have to reach for the magazine and insert it, and if you have to chamber around and then present yourself ready to defend yourself, you know, oftentimes these things are decided in a fraction of a second. And what kind of law is it that requires that a citizen give a predator attacker a several second head start? It's just ridiculous, and we ought to resent it.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, David, actually. And I know I have to tell you that I have spoken to law enforcement here in California. And one of the issues I'm going to take up with opencarry.org and the folks that started that is that from the law enforcement's point of view, here's what happens. Because of dispatch and the way the dispatch has been trained, they will get a call. This is probably just a normal call. They're going to get a call from someone maybe in a grocery store on a cell phone. And that cell phone person, depending upon how easily panicked they are, and some of them more panicked than others, are going to say, there's a man in the store with a gun. Now, when that dispatch turns around, they're going to send that out to a patrol unit, and what that patrol unit is going to hear is, man in store with gun. Now, as a result of that, now I'm only speaking about California because they're not familiar with the open carry and they're not used to seeing guns. So I'm just really going to restrict it to California right now. So what's going to happen is they're going to roll up on this, and they jokingly have said to me, you know, sometimes we have a hard time getting an address, much less a full description of what's taking place. So dispatch is only trained to say a man with a gun. So they're going to approach that store under the pretense, right or wrong, that there is a man in there with a loaded weapon and there is a threat. So they are going to approach this situation in a manner which may be uncomfortable to the wearer of that gun. Now, I know that's going to be a little bit of a learning curve in California. You know, they kind of got to get over this a little bit. Now, you know, if there's some guy standing there who is probably has the look of someone who shouldn't have a gun, it's probably going to be portrayed even worse. If it's a citizen like you and I, David, and we're there, people are going to say, well, he's probably in law enforcement, and they'll let it pass. They may not even call anybody. But the situation is between law enforcement and the law itself, there's a gap. And that gap is going to be how dispatch tells that patrol unit what's going on. And you have to understand that the patrolman is not going to make a decision based upon what dispatch has said, because dispatch is not going to call up and say, oh, hey, there's a citizen in there wearing a gun, he's probably okay. They don't just do things that way. They just report, hey, there's a citizen in there with a gun. So there's a little bit of a gap in here that somehow we're going to have to approach that in California. Now, I'm only speaking California. But do you see what I'm saying there, David?
It has to be approached really everywhere, particularly where there's urban areas, even in places where it's been long-standing. And it is a training and an education and a normalizing effort that's all rolled into one, because the man with the gun who may look disreputable may in fact be an undercover police officer, may in fact be a federal agent. I mean, you don't know. Right. And really the criteria has to be, what is this armed person doing with the gun? Is he standing there shopping, or is he brandishing or threatening or whatever? And again, you know, there are places where it's not an uncommon sight to see an armed citizen, and law enforcement has, through training and through normalization, gotten able to handle it just fine.